Arriving home, the garage door slid up on my electronic command. I blinked in surprise. I had nowhere to park in my own garage. My wife's silver BMW was in her spot on the left, but a shiny red F-150 pickup truck was parked in my spot on the right. Well, I had wondered before if my wife Bev was faithful. Guess I have my answer now. I recognized the truck as belonging to Ted. He and his wife, Charlie, moved into a new house about a mile away a year and a half or so ago. Ted is a junior partner at Bev's parents' law firm and has been with them about 8 years. Last week, he was showing off his new truck to several of us at a party at Bev's parents' house. It is deer season, and almost every male in town packs up and goes off to deer camp for the whole 2-week season. It's been a tradition in this part of the South as long as anybody can remember. Some wives and daughters go too, but it is mostly a guy event, a buddy's father's son sort of thing. My wife is a girly girl and has not the slightest interest in roughing it in the woods overnight, much less for 2 weeks. I belong to a hunting club east of town with buddies from work, and Ted belongs to a club west of town with a pack of lawyers, a conniving, cunning crowd I am happy to avoid. The season starts tomorrow morning, and I left for hunting camp at noon today to get ready. Bev expects me to be gone for the whole 2 weeks like every other male in town. Charlie, no doubt, expects Ted to be at his camp for 2 weeks too. So Bev just opens the garage door, Ted drives in before dawn or after sunset, Bev closes the door, and voila, one has a perfect setting for an extended secret meeting. The wronged spouses have no clue of the intense connection going on behind closed doors. The problem is that I got to feeling poorly about 6 o'clock today. I decided to make the 2-hour drive back home in case I was coming down with something. I'd much rather recover from the flu or such in the comfort of home under the care of my devoted wife rather than tough it out in the woods alone. That is the only reason that I happen to be rolling up here at 8 o'clock tonight to discover this clever little secret hideaway. I grabbed some medicine at the drugstore when I got back to civilization and was actually feeling quite a bit better now, or at least I was until my discovery. I suppose I am not surprised by Bev's unfaithfulness. She is self-absorbed, almost obsessed with herself, just like her mother. She is incredibly attractive and flirtatious, men desire her, and she has opportunity to stray given my frequent travel. It is enough to make a husband think twice. No point in getting angry or upset. Cheating spouses have been around for ages. They didn't put the warning against unfaithfulness in the 10 Commandments 2,500 years ago because it was a new concept. Nor is unfaithfulness exclusive to either gender. After all, it takes one of each to make the affair work properly. It might be interesting to go inside, confront them, and create a scene, but that wouldn't accomplish anything useful in the end. I now have solid evidence of my wife's unfaithfulness. The question is how to use it to my advantage. I turn off my truck lights, close the garage door, and quietly slip away. The house is on a 3-acre lot at the end of a cul-de-sac. A large neighborhood lake is behind the house with a swampy creek exiting from the lake's dam and running in a ravine along the far side of my house and then swinging to the other side of the street in front of the house. This leaves my house fairly isolated. The garage is on the far end of the house by the ravine. It is unlikely the cheating lovers or any nosy neighbors noticed my arrival or departure. While I belong to the hunting club, I also enjoy my alone time. I bought a 5-acre parcel of land next to the club. My parcel includes a pond and a small 2-bedroom farmhouse where I stay. I hunt on the club's leased land and might go up to the main club area to chat with the guys and maybe have a soda. But generally, I enjoy my solitude down at the farmhouse for my 2-week escape from the world. In the summer, Bev and some of her girlfriends come out to swim in the pond and sunbathe. I get dragged into making drinks for the bathing beauties and frying catfish for lunch. It is a pleasant responsibility as there is a lot of exposed feminine beauty basking in the sun. Given the pond's remoteness, the girls sometimes get pretty daring in what they expose to the sunlight, to which of course I do not object. Well, tonight, I have a 2-hour ride back to the hunting camp and my farmhouse to contemplate my situation and plan a course of action. My situation in high school: I had been an excellent student and a good baseball player. My family has a long military tradition, and I wanted to attend one of the U.S. military academies, VMI, or the Citadel. But Dad was quite ill, so I accepted a baseball scholarship at the state university that was only about 50 miles from home. While I had been a standout player in high school and American Legion baseball, college was a big step up. I played but was just a solid, reliable utility player and no longer a star. It probably didn't help that I was an engineering major with a heavy academic load. I had reached the limit of my baseball career, but I excelled in my studies. This was during the time of the Vietnam War, so I planned to do my part and joined Army ROTC. After graduating college, I went into the Army as an infantry second lieutenant. 9 months later, I was in the Mekong Delta with the 9th Infantry Division. For 2 months, I was Assistant Battalion S3 and then was assigned as a rifle platoon leader. Turns out I had a knack for leading men in combat, accomplishing the mission, defeating the enemy, and keeping my men as safe as possible. I was wounded once in the left arm and back by grenade fragments. The wounds were minor nothing compared to what some other soldiers endured. I was back in the field within 10 days and felt embarrassed to receive a Purple Heart for those minor wounds considering what some of the other guys went through. Following my Vietnam tour, I was assigned to FT, Benning, to train soldiers headed to the war. After fulfilling my service obligation, I used my GI Bill to get an engineering master's degree from the University of Texas. This, along with my veteran's preference, landed me a job with a NASA laboratory in Bev's hometown. Bev was a Vietnam War widow. Her husband had been an Air Force Academy graduate who was shot down and killed over North Vietnam on his 12th mission. No body was recovered. He and Bev had been married 18 months. Mary, a woman scientist in my group, had gone to college with Bev and introduced me to her at a party. Mary is a born matchmaker, and she encouraged me to ask Bev out. I was immediately attracted to Bev. She was incredibly beautiful, intelligent, and flirtatious, but she was way out of my league. I had never been much of a ladies' man and had only gone on sporadic dates without much success. I had never had a serious girlfriend too preoccupied with baseball, academics, or military service to engage in such social interactions. Nevertheless, Bev responded positively to my attempts to win her over, though I am sure she found my awkward attempts amusing. 5 months later, we were married. That was 4 years ago now. I always wondered why someone as beautiful as Bev would be interested in, let alone marry, me. Louisa, an older secretary at work, provided me with some insight when she said, "John, good men to marry are scarce around here. There are plenty of unsuitable options, but you are a smart guy, have a good job with lots of potential. You are a war hero, which impresses the girls around here. Wouldn't mean much up north or out on the West Coast, but it's gold in the eyes of girls here. You also have good manners. You're a handsome ex-athlete and ex-soldier that makes any healthy girl swoon. Heck, if Bev hadn't snatched you up so quickly, I was going to introduce you to my niece who's in college when she comes home this summer." Southern women in that era certainly had a different perspective from Southern men. Like most men, I was physically attracted to Bev and overlooked deeper compatibility issues. There was nothing terribly wrong, but there was nothing exceptionally right either. Bev and I get along, do things together, have a great love life, take trips. But we are fundamentally different people. She is a social butterfly. She spends her days at the country club playing tennis and golf with friends, loves parties, and immerses herself in the social scene of our small southern city. I, on the other hand, am more of an introvert, enjoy reading, find fulfillment in my technical work that the general public isn't interested in, and travel often for work. There's no major problem, but things just aren't clicking as well as they should. Bev is the favored, only daughter of the best lawyers in town, a woman who values material comforts and privileges, and a woman with incredible pride. Any divorce from her would be challenging and very costly. But if I can clearly prove her infidelity, I can have more control over the divorce terms and have a quick, private settlement. I'll just consider this marriage as a learning experience. Preparation first thing the next morning, I returned to town. The bank was open Saturday morning, so I transferred all of our money to new accounts. I canceled credit cards that were in Bev's name and transferred all mutual funds to new accounts. That took care of what I could do on the financial aspect of the upcoming ordeal. I figured Bev would be preoccupied with her lover and unlikely to notice what I had done. Next, I paid a visit to a lawyer I met playing softball in a church league. He was a Vietnam vet too, and more than willing to help. Over a cup of coffee at his house, he provided me with a brief overview of the situation. Without substantial evidence of infidelity, I would face a hefty price for freedom in this state. He also cautioned me about Bev's parents, who would not be easy opponents in a divorce battle. He explained that her parents were both strong, determined lawyers. I scheduled an appointment for 8 a.m. on Monday at my friend's office to begin the official legal proceedings. My next stop was the library, where I read up on the state's divorce laws and the requirements for proving adultery. Based on my research and my lawyer friend's advice, I needed to establish Bev's inclination and opportunity to commit adultery. I didn't necessarily need photographic evidence, although that would certainly strengthen my case. However, now that I had knowledge of the infidelity, I had to be careful not to do anything that could be interpreted as condoning it. Therefore, returning home and pretending like everything was fine was not a wise choice. I realized it was better to take action sooner rather than later. I then paid a visit to Bo's Army-Navy store. Bo was a Korean War veteran and collected all sorts of military items. His store was like a museum of military artifacts. In a back room, he kept a variety of interesting military items that might not be entirely legal for civilians to own, but for Bo, they were treasures. I purchased a few items and spent the obligatory hour drinking coffee with Bo and swapping war stories. Finally, I stopped by to see Jan, the wife of my best friend in town. Her husband, George, and I had played college baseball together and both ended up working at the lab. I asked George to step aside so I could speak with Jan privately. With some persuading, I convinced her to make 2 short recordings on my tape player for me. She's a clever girl and quickly understood the circumstances of my request and asked very probing questions. I pleaded with her, reminding her of our long friendship, and promised to explain everything in a few days. I had missed lunch and was starving, so I grabbed a bite at Applebee's and thought through my plan for the evening. I would have liked a drink, but stuck with coffee to stay alert. Getting in position, I headed out and arrived at the edge of the woods on the opposite bank of the lake from my house a bit after 4:30. As the sun set, I cautiously navigated through the gathering darkness down into the ravine, crossed the stream, and slipped into the woods along the lake shore. I relieved myself down in the ravine woods, as nothing is worse than laying in an ambush or an observation post and needing to use the bathroom. I settled into a thicket of red buckeye on the edge of our yard, maybe 50 feet from the house. I was dressed in hunting camouflage, normal local male attire around here this time of year, and in the darkness I was well concealed. I had binoculars and a clear view into the kitchen window and the back screen porch, but not much else. About 5:30, Bev appeared in the kitchen and busied herself with preparing supper. A few minutes later, Ted appeared carrying drinks for them. Looks like martinis with a couple of olives were the drink of choice tonight. They had an animated conversation for a few minutes, and then Ted left and reappeared on the porch. He fired up my grill and went back into the kitchen for some quality time with my wife. After some enjoyable moments, she sent him away with a platter of steaks. Ted returned with the cooked steaks, and they engaged in happy and lively conversation and teasing as they fixed their plates. All in all, it was a very pleasant scene. Only problem was that it was my wife in my house but another man enjoying their company. The mischievous couple disappeared from the kitchen, no doubt off to enjoy their steaks in the dining room. I quietly entered the back door to the utility room, using my key to unlock the door. Bev keeps the utility sliding panel door to the kitchen closed, as the utility room is always too untidy to be in public view. I cracked the panel door open. I could hear Bev and Ted talking, and it seemed they were enjoying a romantic, candle-lit dinner in the dining room. I continued into the garage, where I deflated the right side tires of Ted's truck. I have an electric air pump under my workbench. I removed the pump's hose and put it in my backpack. Even if Ted thought to look for my pump, it would be useless now. His truck was temporarily stuck at my house, and his ability to drive anywhere was limited to his feet. Next, I checked the telephone in the garage, and it was working. We have a butler's pantry that has doors into the utility room adjacent to the kitchen and into the dining room, where Bev and Ted were enjoying their dinner. I carefully entered the butler's pantry from the utility room and crouched down next to the door into the dining room. I could hear the adulterers' conversation as clearly as if I was sitting at the table with them. Ted was saying, "These are delicious steaks you picked out. I love this wine too. I didn't know John had any taste in wines. I always thought of him as the sporty kind of guy drinking beer." Bev giggled, "Oh, you misjudged John." After we got married, he found out I liked wine, so he became quite knowledgeable to please me. Don't underestimate him. He is very smart. I heard yesterday from my friends at the club that he is a strong candidate for the lab's PhD program next year. He doesn't know it yet. Sometimes John can be oblivious. Well, at least that is some good news, I thought. Where do you think he will go? Ted asked. University of Texas again, I suspect. There is a professor out there that he really likes, and they stay in touch, my wife replied. Will you go with him? To Austin? Do I look like a cowgirl to you? It's only a year for coursework and then doing the dissertation back at the lab. I'll stay here and take care of the house like a good wife, Bev chuckled. That could be an interesting year for you without a resident husband. Does he suspect you cheat on him? John? No. He is just a simple country boy, bless him. I make sure to keep him fully satisfied, and he is absorbed in his work, which is way beyond my understanding. Between his dedication to his work and his travels, I can easily have some fun with other men when I desire variety in my romantic life. I look forward to next year, Ted said gleefully. But I won't be alone, right? My wife laughed. Of course not, Ted. I love having options, not just one. Did you know that I've been with you longer than John? Ted replied with amusement, I guess that is true. Bev laughed harder. Oh my, do you remember that time my parents came home early and caught us and going at it on the sofa? I thought my dad was going to have a heart attack. Ted joined in the laughter. How could I forget? I had only been working for your parents about a year then. There I was engaged in activities with their married daughter. Your husband had just gone off to Vietnam the week before, as I recall. I was sure I was about to lose my job, if not worse. Oh, you would have been, but Mom stepped in and saved you. I knew there was some miracle. Bev continued, the next day Mom took me to lunch at the club. She gave me a lesson in adultery. Pointed out my mistakes that got us caught, explained the laws about adultery, emphasized the importance of discretion and careful planning to avoid getting caught, and shared various techniques and secret places for clandestine meetings. You're kidding, right? Ted exclaimed. Nope. Turns out Mom had been unfaithful to Dad even before they got married and had it down to an art. She said her mother was the same way. It's hard to believe that about Grandma. She always seemed so serious and strict. It's difficult to picture her engaging in affairs with every man she found interesting. Anyway, it seems I am continuing a long family tradition of being unfaithful. I think the women in my family just enjoy variety and find excitement in the riskiness of it all. That's quite a family legacy. I could hear the amusement in Bev's voice as she asked, okay, Ted, I have to ask. Have you ever been involved with Mom? Do I really have to answer that? Bev chuckled, no need. I can guess the answer. I'm sure your early job promotion was earned by the hard work you did between my mom's legs. There may be some truth to that, Ted replied, sounding restrained. Ah, so you've had the audacity of being close with both the mother and daughter while cheating my father, my late husband, and now my current husband. My, what a morally questionable person you are. No wonder we get along so well. I have certainly discovered a lot about my wife tonight. I never had a clue. Bev continued her questioning. So how about your wife? Is Charlie suspicious? You know, she and I went to high school and college together and even lived together for a while. She is a smart girl, much smarter than you. I was always surprised she married you. If I remember correctly, you slept with me on the day of your wedding, which was about 5 years ago, right? Ted replied with a serious tone. Things have been a bit tense at home lately. Yes, Charlie is suspicious, but I am cautious and not as active as you are. Ted continued, I'm starting to think my marriage with Charlie doesn't have a promising future. But I have to be smart about how to end it without causing too much damage in this state. I had met Ted's wife, Charlie. Well, Charlene really, a number of times at parties and at the club. She was attractive and, as Bev said, very smart. Sometimes a woman's intelligence gets overlooked because of her looks. But if you actually spoke to Charlie, it was evident right away that she was very intelligent. I always enjoyed her company. How about you? Are you going to stay with John? Oh my goodness, yes, Bev replied. He is just what I want in a husband. I actually do love him. I'm just not faithful to him. We talk about having kids eventually. He is a fantastic match for that and would be a great father. No, he's a keeper. Ted observed, Bev, you like the finer things in life. I always envisioned you marrying a well-off man, not a government research engineer. You need someone to keep you in the style to which you are accustomed. Well, John does well enough. Mom and Dad are wealthy and give me money. They have always been good about spoiling their only daughter. Then there is Grandma and Grandpa's trust fund they left me. It all goes together to make a nice financial package. I always suspected my in-laws gave Bev money. But the trust fund, now that was news. Bev changed the topic. All of this talk of disloyalty is making me eager. The wine and steaks are gone. I'll take the plates to the kitchen. You pour us some fancy liquor. Darn, I wish they would quit drinking my good stuff. I heard Bev scrape the plates into the trash can and put them in the sink as I slipped back to the utility room. Ted reappeared in the dining room with 2 glasses of my fancy liquor, and he and my wife enjoyed a long, passionate hug as I watched through the cracked door. When they broke the hug to catch their breath, Bev gasped, "Let's go in the den and finish our fancy liquor." They left, headed out of sight toward the den. I could hear some faint noises coming from the den, but the unfaithful pair were outside my vision. About 20 minutes later, my wife and Ted, both there now, hurried down the hall, which I could see, to our master bedroom. Soon there was a burst of laughter and joyful squeals emanating from our bedroom. The disloyal lovers were spending time with each other. Execution, it was now H hour and time to move. I went into the garage and made my first phone call. The phone rang twice, and then Charlie came on the line. "Hello?" I played Jan's first recording into the phone. "Hello, Charlie. This is a friend. Ted is having an affair with Bev. You will find them both at her house now." What was Charlie's shocked reply? I hung up and called the fire department dispatch office. The phone was answered immediately, and I played Jan's second recording. "Hurry over. The house at 8 Magnolia Drive is on fire. Smoke is pouring out of it and there are people inside." I hung up as soon as the recording finished. I had to move quickly. I probably had no more than about 5 or 6 minutes before the fire department and Charlie showed up at the front door. I switched on a tactical red light flashlight I had bought at Bo's Army Navy store. I grabbed the metal trash can from the garage and placed it in the kitchen. Then I hurried to the front door and turned on the porch and garage exterior lights and ran back to the den. In a moment of inspiration, I grabbed my wife and Ted's scattered clothes and dumped them in the utility room. I pulled a gas mask, also from Bo's, out of my knapsack and put it on. Darn, that military training doesn't leave you. The mask went on and was cleared well within the military standard 9 seconds. Next, I popped 2 smoke grenades and a canister of CS tear gas and dropped them in the metal trash can. The tear gas was from Bo's unofficial and illegal stash of military toys. With my tasks done, I retreated to the utility room to wait. Out of petty spite, I took Ted's driver's license and credit cards from his wallet and pocketed them. I would destroy them later just to cause Ted the pain of being without and having to replace them. He was betraying my wife right down the hall there, so a little pettiness on my part seemed justified. The smoke grenades and tear gas canister hissed and billowed out a dense cloud of smoke and tear gas, quickly filling the kitchen, and then the cloud flowed over into the adjacent dining room and den. Military tear gas is actually an aerosol dispersion of fine powder and not a true gas. Regardless of that fine distinction, the smoke alarm in the kitchen began blaring, and the one at the hall entrance going to the bedrooms followed suit rapidly. The screeching alarms elicited surprised cries from my wife and Ted. I heard them rushing down the hall from the bedroom. My wife cried out, "Something is on fire in the kitchen." They made it as far as the kitchen door before the tear gas hit them. One moment they were fine and rushing forward to put out a fire. The next moment they were gasping and coughing and screaming in pain as they rubbed their eyes, worsening the burning. Tears flowed freely. Tear gas is a cruel and merciless foe. Ted cried out, "The smoke is poisonous, get out, get out." He bravely pushed my wife towards the front door. "I'll grab our clothes." Since Ted never served in the military, he did not recognize the tear gas effects, which any military veteran would. I heard Ted struggling around in the smoke-filled den futilely trying to find their clothes that were now piled up in the utility room next to me. Within a few seconds, the tear gas became too much, and he followed my wife in a hasty dash out the front door. I heard the fire department sirens in the distance and hurried to the den. I quickly scattered my wife and Ted's clothes about the den again. I tossed my wife's clothes to hang from the top of the ceiling chandelier for good measure. It would take a ladder to retrieve Bev's clothes. The first fire truck lights were flashing through the front window, so it was time for me to leave. I ran back to the kitchen, put on insulated gloves, and took the metal trash can with the smoke and tear gas canisters. I exited through the rear door of the utility room, locked it behind me, and ran into the woods. As I passed the lake, I paused to throw the still smoking smoke grenades and tear gas canister as far out into the lake as I could, and then ran back to my truck. It was only 8 o'clock now. I then drove back to the hunting camp, throwing the metal trash can in a dumpster on the way out of town. The finale, unfortunately, I could not watch the results of my cunning plan unfold in front of my house, so the following was relayed to me later by others who were present. I could only enjoy the events vicariously. The fire department and Charlie arrived simultaneously, followed by a growing crowd of curious neighbors attracted by the sirens and lights. The tear gas-infused smoke was billowing out of the open front door. The exterior lights that I had turned on illuminated the bizarre scene. Charlie walked over to Ted, who straightened up as she approached. Without saying a word, she kicked him. This elicited a scream of pain from him. Ted collapsed groaning on the ground next to Bev. Charlie stood over him and let out a stream of angry words that one would never expect a poised Southern lady like her to know. A firefighter grabbed Charlie and moved her away from Bev and Ted, who were both still gasping, coughing, and crying. Charlie continued to verbally lash out at Ted from a distance. A deputy sheriff arrived to mediate and keep Charlie and Ted apart. One team of firefighters entered through the front door to locate the source of the smoke. Another team went around the back and broke into the utility room rear door to approach the fire from a different angle. Due to the dense smoke, the firefighters were wearing breathing apparatuses, so they were unaware that the smoke cloud contained tear gas. A second fire truck arrived along with 2 more sheriff's department cars. My neighbors were getting quite a show. Fortunately, the local TV station had a crew filming the aftermath of a car accident on the highway about 2 miles from my house. They quickly headed over when they heard the fire department and police calls on the scanner about my house fire. They filmed the scene in my front yard. There were probably around 50 neighbors standing and watching in awe. The next morning's news broadcast had an excellent sequence showing the crowd observing the smoke pouring out of the house as firefighters came and went. Best of all, they showed a shot of my wife and Ted wrapped up in blankets, staring blankly at the smoking house. Finally, one of the firefighters emerged and said to the scene commander, "There is no fire. There is a lot of very pungent smoke, but we cannot find any fire. Jim Bob is checking the attic now, but nothing is burned or scorched that we can see." The scene commander suggested that Ted and Bev not stay in the house until it was thoroughly inspected for electrical or gas issues. Bev said, "I will go to my parents' house." Ignoring our neighbors and their offers to help, Bev quickly dressed in the bedroom and left in her BMW. Ted nodded and said, "I think I will go to the Holiday Inn." The scene commander added dryly, "That is probably a wise choice." Ted took longer since he had to gather his scattered clothes. As he tried to back his truck out of the garage, he discovered that both tires were flat. His truck was stuck halfway inside and halfway outside of the garage. One of the neighbors finally took pity on him and gave him a ride to the Holiday Inn. Once there, he realized he had no credit cards and only $25 in cash. He called Bev, who gave her credit card over the phone to the Holiday Inn clerk, only to discover that her credit card had been canceled. Bev's dad had to step in and provide his personal card over the phone before Ted could secure a room for the night. My wife and her lover were very unhappy individuals. The next morning, I returned straight to hunting camp and went to bed. The next morning, I was up before dawn and out on a remote deer stand. I took time to bury the gas mask, flashlight, and gloves deep in the woods. After that, I dawdled and did not return to the farmhouse until almost 1 o'clock. Sure enough, there was a stranger sitting on my front porch. He was a lean, older man with grizzled gray hair. As I walked up, the stranger said, "Hi, you must be John." "I am," I replied. "John, my name is Jimmy. I am an investigator for the fire department." I looked at him quizzically. He continued, "Strange thing happened last night at your house. There was a fire." I interrupted, feigning concern. "Was Bev hurt?" "How bad is the damage?" No, everybody is fine." Funny thing about this fire, though. There was a heap of smoke, But even looking this morning in the daylight, we can find no evidence of a fire. Smoke, but no fire. I am not sure I understand, I answered, trying to seem confused. Jimmy sighed. Me neither. Been doing this 20 years and never seen anything quite like it. I just stood there looking suitably perplexed. Did I mention your wife and neighbor, Ted, were flushed out in their attire by the smoke? Flushed right out in front of the whole neighborhood, fire crews, sheriff's department, and TV reporters, not to mention Ted's wife. I shook my head. No, you failed to mention that, I said, suppressing a grin. You don't seem to be surprised your wife's flirtation with your neighbor. It was my turn to sigh. Well, if you saw my wife, you know she is a beautiful creature. Any husband with such a wife knows there is always a chance she will have a crush when his back is turned. Sad, but a fact of life. Jimmy nodded. Yeah, ain't that the truth? What's that old song say? Something like, if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. Reckon there is something to that. Seems to be some wisdom in it, I agreed. Funny thing about your wife and Ted's symptoms. Sure seems like they got into some sort of irritant. The fire crew said the smoke was pretty tough. Irritant, doesn't seem very likely. Yeah, it is illegal to have in this state unless you are police or military. I did not make any reply. You know, only you and Ted's wife, Charlie, have any incentive to do something like smoke two unfaithful spouses out into public view with an irritant. Pretty interesting plan. I replied slowly. Well, I have been here at hunting camp since Friday afternoon. Jimmy ignored my proffered alibi and continued, talked with Charlie this morning before I came out here. Shoo, that gal is something, ain't she? Yes, she certainly is, I agreed. Charlie says she had doubts about her husband's loyalty but knew nothing definite. Says she got a call from a woman saying her husband was at your house with your wife. Youngish-sounding woman, maybe in her 20s or so, southern accent, good diction, so probably well-educated. But Charlie did not recognize the voice. This call was just before the so-called fire. It allowed Charlie and the rest of your neighborhood to arrive just as your wife ran out of the house. Jimmy waited to see if I had a comment. I did not, so he continued. Now, if Ted, or your wife for that matter, had been injured, Charlie would be high on everyone's list of suspects as the perpetrator. Jimmy pursed his lips thoughtfully, but this operation, it was smooth, carefully planned to each tiny detail, and executed precisely. Charlie is not that kind of person. Shoot, she'd just confront you directly. And then she'd demand answers. She's not the type of person to waste time plotting. Yeah, I can see that I concurred. But you. Hump smart, military background, effective combat leader, engineer. You, on the other hand, are exactly the kind of person who would know how to do this, how to plan it, and then really pull it off. I shrugged my shoulders. What can I say? I was up here at the camp hunting. Jimmy smiled tiredly. Oh yeah, your alibi. I stopped by the main camp before coming to see you. The gossip line in this county is unbelievable. They all knew everything about this whole affair. They all swear they have seen you around camp off and on all weekend. In fact, Henry swears it was about 8 o'clock last night when he was sure you two were having a drink together. 8 o'clock just happens to be about when the so-called fire started. Jimmy gave a big sigh. John, you got some good friends and they really like you. But please tell them for me they don't lie worth a darn. He went on, interestingly, the fire department dispatch that got the call about your house fire said it was a woman that called them too. Their description of the woman sounded just like Charlie's caller. In both cases, the woman said her piece, didn't answer questions, and hung up. Could almost make one think they were recordings. Jimmy watched me for a minute, then continued his monologue. You know I can do some tests, and I am sure I will find irritant residue in your house. I can fill out a bunch of paperwork and get what number called Charlie and the fire department last night. That might be interesting. This morning, I found a man's footprints down by the lake back of your house about your size, I'd say. Suspect if I searched the lake, I would find some irritant canisters. Bet if I make the rounds of Army-Navy surplus stores, I might find a record of interesting recent purchases. Not irritant, of course, as that is illegal. But maybe things like a gas mask that would be useful for this. Man, this Jimmy is nobody's fool, I thought to myself. I'm an amateur dealing with a grandmaster. Jimmy stood up and stretched. But money is tight these days. I got a whole lot of cases to investigate. There was no property damage, nobody was injured, it's your property. Anyway, it'd take a bunch of government lawyers a long time to just figure out what crime, if any, was committed. Reckon there is not much sense in wasting money and time on this. Jimmy sighed deeply, but I would just hate for someone to think they got away with something when they didn't. Well, I got a long drive back to town, better get started. I called out as Jimmy headed to his car. Thanks, Jimmy message received loud and clear. Jimmy turned and smiled, recognizing the old military radio terminology. It was a good plan, Captain. Mission accomplished. Now, don't waste any more time on her. Move on with your life. Jimmy got in his car and headed back to town. Epilogue: I quickly packed up my gear and started back to my house. Hunting season was over for me this year. I stopped by to give George and Jan the explanation I had promised her for making the recordings for me. They had seen the TV clip of the fire that turned out not to be a fire. They recognized Bev but not Ted and had easily put the obvious 2 and 2 together. It took a while to satisfy Jan's curiosity and thirst for every detail. George just sat there shaking his head and laughing occasionally. I thanked John again for her help and went home, not looking forward to having to deal with Bev soon. When I got home, I found Ted had retrieved his truck somehow, and the phone's message light was blinking. Bev had called about every hour on the hour starting at 7 a.m. The messages were essentially, John, I am at my parents' house. Call me as soon as you get this. As the day wore on, she was more irritated, and expressions like, darn it, John, where are you? We need to talk. And please, talk to me before you do anything started being added to the recorded messages. I really didn't feel like dealing with Bev right now, so I ignored the messages. I had missed lunch again and was looking in the refrigerator contemplating possibilities for a sandwich when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Charlie standing there with a wry smile. Charlie is usually a very put-together and chipper lady. Today, she just looked tired and worn out. She said, Hi, John. By now, I suppose you know everything about last night? I do, I replied. Good, then I don't have to explain it again. She smiled, which made her look more like her normal self. We are in the same boat, you and I. Invite me in and offer me a drink. We have a lot to talk about. Come on in, Charlie. What would you like to drink? Somehow Charlie's brash self-invitation was a lift to my doldrums. How about a glass of wine? She replied. White or red? I have an Italian Pinot Grigio or an Oregon Pinot Noir. How about the Pinot Grigio? Grab a seat in the den. I'll bring you your wine. I heard giggling from the den. When I joined her with the wine, I found Charlie smiling as she stared at Bev's clothes still hanging on the chandelier. Bev's other clothes from last night were still scattered on the floor. Are those Bev's? She chortled, pointing at the clothes. I nodded. Charlie laughed, took her wine, and sat down. Are you going to leave them there? Kind of a permanent decoration or trophy or something. Then she added more sadly, maybe at this point, it is more like a monk wearing a hair shirt for self-criticism. Charlie sighed, and her temporary good mood was gone. How long have you known about them? Since Friday night when I came back from hunting camp early and found Ted's pickup in the garage. Did you know or suspect anything? Charlie shook her head sadly. Well, at least you are only 24 hours ahead of me in the learning process. I suspected Ted of cheating starting about a year after we were married, but I never had any real proof, or even enough to do much more than make me wonder if I was paranoid. Obviously, my instincts were correct. I am afraid, so I added, you know Bev and I have been close friends since high school. I just can't believe she, of all people, would betray my husband. Charlie paused for a minute and then continued with a cynical laugh. Actually, I guess I should not be surprised. How much do you know about your wife and her unfaithfulness? Since Friday, I have learned some, but probably only know the tip of the iceberg. Charlie smiled sadly. Well, Bev has always been dishonest, even in high school and college. She cheated on her pilot husband, even while he was flying combat in Vietnam. And she cheated on you probably every time you went out of town. I think Bev gets excited by the danger and thrill of it, the challenging of rules, indulging in forbidden behavior, or something like that. She can't seem to help herself. Charlie turned to look directly at me. Are you going to take her back? No, I have an appointment with a lawyer at 8 tomorrow morning. Charlie looked relieved. Good. One reason I came to talk to you was to tell you she won't change. You deserve better from a wife. You have her caught for adultery, don't hesitate. She is an attractive woman and can manipulate men easily. Charlie shook her finger at me for emphasis, but don't you dare take her back. I smiled at my lecturing neighbor. I won't. Believe me. How about you, Charlie? Are you taking Ted back? No way I would punish him if I could get away with it. I smiled thinking back to what Jimmy had said earlier at the camp about Charlie's fierceness. Would you like to go with me tomorrow morning and see my lawyer? We have essentially the same case. Probably makes sense to use the same lawyer. Charlie smiled. You are moving quicker than I am. Yes, I would love to go with you. Let's get this thing rolling. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 7:30, I offered. The appointment is at 8. Deal. There was a pause and Charlie switched topics. John, this whole affair Saturday night was bizarre. The arson investigator talked with me. I think his name was Jimmy or something like that. Saturday night was no accident, was it? Were you behind it all? I thought for a minute. There was no longer any legal threat from Jimmy. Charlie was now an ally in the pending divorce wars. Why not? So I laid out the events in detail, which elicited laughs in places. It felt good to share the tale with someone. There is no fun in pulling off a tough operation and not being able to brag about it afterwards. To brag to an admiring, pretty woman just makes it that much better. When I got to the parts about Bev and Ted's histories of unfaithfulness, Charlie was incredulous. He was using Bev's mom to get promotions. Amazing, but typical, I guess. Bev's mom and grandmother were involved with other people too. I know both of them. Well, at least I thought I did. Bev's mom gave Bev advice on how to cheat on her partners. I just can't believe it. When I told Charlie about Ted's betrayal on his and Bev's wedding day, Charlie erupted. The part you didn't know was Bev was my maid of honor. Damn her soul. Our therapeutic venting session had done us both good and lifted our spirits. It was a healing experience, and we formed a new friendship as we shared our troubles. We also had finished the whole bottle of wine, which probably didn't hurt either. The phone rang. Bev, no doubt, I said with a grimace. Charlie replied, she won't stop. Might as well deal with her now as later. I picked up the phone and put it on speaker so my new divorce ally could hear. I said neutrally, hello. John, I have been desperate to find you. I will be right over. We need to talk. Bev, there is nothing to talk about. Don't come over. Look, John, I can explain. I have a lot to answer for. But, Bev, you are unfaithful. Why continue the pretense? We are done. Charlie gave me a thumbs up. Look, John, please, I know you are mad. Bev spoke in a placating voice, and you have every right to be mad. I will make it up to you. Let me come over and explain. We'll attend counseling. We can make this work. No. I am seeing a lawyer tomorrow. We are finished. You go your way, and I'll go mine. No blame. Another thumbs up from Charlie. Since pleading hadn't worked, Bev switched gears as smoothly as a sports car pulling into the passing lane. She went on the attack. All right, you sorry fool, Daddy will represent me. He is the best lawyer in the area. He will tear your lawyer apart. I calmly replied, your father is a very good lawyer. However, does he know about your mom's long history of unfaithfulness? Your mom and Ted, for instance? There was dead silence on the phone for maybe 30 seconds. You invaded our privacy, she screeched. No, I did not invade the house. There is no other way. It dawned on her now. You sorry intruder, you were in the house eavesdropping on us. You set the whole thing up. You fool. Damn you. She gasped with realization. You threw my clothes on the chandelier. I know I left them on the end table. I had to walk unclothed, wrapped in a blanket in front of those chuckling firemen with my clothes dangling over their heads. Curse your wretched soul, you humiliated me in front of the whole town. I replied calmly, no, Bev, you embarrassed yourself in front of the whole town. You and Ted even made the morning TV news, I hear. The fight went out of her. I held the winning hand and was not wavering. She said, have your lawyer contact Daddy. At least we can be civil about this. Then she hung up. Charlie laughed and cheerfully sang out, you've got to know when to hold and know when to fold em, know when to fold em, know when to walk away and know when to run. Then Charlie said nostalgically, "Wow, I hope Ted is as reasonable. I am sure he won't be. Of course I will be taking him to the cleaners. Well, I need to get home. My mom is coming over to see how I am doing. How are you doing?" I asked. "Better. Much better. Thanks for talking with me." I walked Charlie to the door and opened it for her. She turned, stood on her toes, and gave me a friendly hug, slowly at first, and more passionately as I returned her gesture. She broke the embrace finally and said, "Whew, I have wanted to do that since I first met you. Want to come over for dinner tomorrow night?" "Certainly," I replied. "How many times do you think they fooled each other?" Charlie asked. "I don't really know a lot from the way they were talking." "Well then, I guess we better get started tomorrow night evening the score. Come prepared to put in some effort for your meal." With that, Charlie walked to her car with that spirited stride that only women can do.